The first sign of trouble wasn't the late nights or the sudden business trips. It wasn't even the way his eyes would dart to his phone whenever it buzzed, his fingers quick to flip it face down. No, the first real sign came on an ordinary Tuesday evening when I found a long blonde hair on the collar of his jacket, a jacket I had just picked up from the dry cleaners the day before. I stood in our walk-in closet, rubbing the single strand between my fingers. My own hair was dark brown, cut in a practical bob that barely brushed my shoulders. This hair was at least 10 inches long, the color of honey in sunlight. I knew immediately what it meant, yet I slipped the hair into an envelope and tucked it into my desk drawer. Evidence, I thought, though I wasn't ready to admit why I needed it. That night, when Marcus came home from the office, I watched him move through our kitchen with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. Tall and still handsome at 42, with just enough silver threading through his dark hair to make him look distinguished rather than old. He loosened his tie, kissed my cheek, and asked about dinner as if nothing had changed. "Just salmon and roasted vegetables," I said, setting his plate in front of him. "How was your day?"
"Busy."
"The Mitchell account is taking more time than I expected." The lie came easily to him. I nodded, pretending I didn't know that the Mitchell account had been closed last month. Pretending I didn't see the faint smudge of pink lipstick on his collar, just visible if you knew where to look. "I thought we could go away this weekend," I suggested. "Maybe to that bed and breakfast in Vermont we've been meaning to try." Marcus took a long sip of his wine before answering. "Can't this weekend, Liv. I have to go to Chicago for a conference. Should have mentioned it earlier, but it slipped my mind." Another lie. I'd checked his calendar that afternoon. There was no conference. "That's a shame," I said, keeping my voice light. "Maybe next month." He smiled, relieved at how easily I'd accepted his excuse.
"Definitely.
"We're due for a getaway." I watched him eat, this stranger I'd been married to for 15 years. I wondered how long it had been going on, this double life. I wondered who she was, this woman with honey blonde hair and pink lipstick. Mostly, I wondered when exactly my husband had stopped loving me. Later, lying beside him in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about our house, this beautiful colonial in one of Boston's most exclusive suburbs. I thought about how much Marcus loved it, how he'd boasted to his colleagues about the address, the yard, the renovated chef's kitchen. I thought about whose name was actually on the deed. And for the first time since finding that blonde hair, I smiled in the darkness. I didn't confront him right away. Some women might have thrown the evidence in his face, demanded confessions, launched into tearful recriminations. But that had never been my style. I was methodical by nature, a trait that had served me well in building my property development business from nothing to a 7-figure enterprise. Before I made any move, I needed all the facts. So I began my research. I hired a private investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Rhea, who had come highly recommended by my divorce attorney friend, Caroline. "I don't need photos of them in bed together," I told Rhea during our first meeting in a quiet coffee shop 3 towns over from where I lived. "I just need to know who she is, how long it's been going on, and if there's anyone else." Rhea nodded, her gray eyes showing neither judgment nor pity. "Most clients want the explicit photos for the divorce proceedings." "I'm not most clients," I said, sliding an envelope with her retainer across the table. "And I'm not sure yet about divorce." While Rhea did her work, I did mine. I gathered financial records, made copies of tax returns, took inventory of our assets. I discovered that Marcus had opened a separate bank account 6 months ago. Not huge, about $30,000, but clearly his exit strategy fund. He'd also been looking at rental listings for luxury apartments downtown, according to his search history on our shared iPad.
So he was planning to leave me.
The knowledge settled in my stomach like a stone. 2 weeks after hiring her, Rhea called me for a meeting. We met in the same coffee shop, and she brought a thin folder with her findings. Her name is Cassandra Winters. She's 28, works as a marketing coordinator at your husband's firm. They've been involved for approximately 8 months, based on my investigation. 8 months. While I was nursing my mother through her final battle with cancer, while I was managing both her care and my business, my husband had been starting a relationship with a woman 14 years his junior. They meet primarily at her apartment in Back Bay, Rhea continued. Twice a week, usually. Tuesdays and Thursdays after work. He tells her he's planning to leave you after he gets his finances in order. I took a sip of my now cold coffee. Is there anyone else? Not that I could find. Ms. Winters appears to be the only extramarital relationship at this time. I nodded, looking through the discreet photos Rhea had taken. Cassandra was pretty in an obvious way, tall, slim, with the kind of long blonde hair that men like Marcus seemed to gravitate toward as they approached middle age. In one photo, they were leaving a restaurant, his hand possessively on the small of her back. In another, they were kissing in the hallway outside what I assumed was her apartment. Thank you, Rhea, I said, closing the folder. This is exactly what I needed. Do you want me to continue surveillance? She asked. I thought about it for a moment.
No.
I have enough, but I may call you again in the future. As I drove home, I thought about what to do with this information. I could confront Marcus, demand a divorce, take half of everything. That's what most people would expect. But as I pulled into the driveway of our beautiful home, the home that had been in my family for generations, the home that I had renovated with money from my first major development deal, the home that was legally mine alone, I realized I didn't want to be predictable. No, I wanted something more. Something that would make the lesson stick. That night, I greeted Marcus with a kiss and a glass of his favorite scotch. I'd made his favorite dinner, steak with roasted potatoes and asparagus. I wore the blue dress he'd always liked, the one that matched my eyes. What's the occasion? He asked, loosening his tie as he accepted the drink. Do I need an occasion to do something nice for my husband? I smiled, touching his cheek lightly. He looked momentarily guilty, and I wondered if he was thinking about where he'd been just an hour ago, in Cassandra's apartment in her bed. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by the easy confidence that had always been both his best and worst quality. Over dinner, I steered the conversation toward the future, a topic we'd been avoiding for months. I've been thinking about making some changes, I said casually. Marcus looked up from his steak. What kind of changes? Professional ones, mostly. I'm considering selling the business. That got his full attention. My property development company was worth millions, the primary source of our comfortable lifestyle. Selling? Why would you do that? I thought you loved your work. I do, but I'm tired, Marcus. Mom's death took a lot out of me. I took a sip of wine. I'm thinking it might be time for a new chapter. I could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes. If I sold the business, there would be a substantial influx of cash. Cash that, as my husband, he would have a claim to in a divorce. Well, he said carefully, that's certainly something to think about. What would you do instead? Travel, maybe. Take some time for myself. I reached across the table to touch his hand. For us. He turned his hand over to squeeze mine, and I noticed he didn't meet my eyes when he said, that sounds wonderful. Over the next 2 weeks, I laid the groundwork. I casually mentioned meetings with business brokers. I left fake valuation documents where he would find them, suggesting my company was worth even more than it actually was. I made sure he overheard phone calls about substantial offers. And all the while, I watched him change his plans. The searches for downtown apartments stopped. The separate bank account remained untouched. His Thursday late meetings at the office became less frequent. He thought I was his meal ticket, his golden goose. He was deciding to stay, at least until he could claim half of the windfall from my business sale. What Marcus didn't know, what he had apparently forgotten in his 15 years of living in marital comfort, was that I had never added his name to the deed of our house. The colonial had been left to me by my grandmother. I'd renovated it before we married, and while I'd considered adding him to the deed after our wedding, something had always stopped me. Call it intuition or simply good business sense, but I'd kept the property in my name alone. Similarly, my business was protected by an ironclad prenuptial agreement that Marcus had signed without much thought 15 years ago, when my company was just a struggling startup and he was the one with the promising career and family money. But the biggest thing Marcus didn't know was that I had no intention of selling my business. That was just the bait for my trap. 3 weeks after my dinner with Rhea, I decided it was time. I'd set the stage carefully, and now I simply needed to watch the show unfold. It was a Friday evening in early autumn, the air just crisp enough to need a light jacket. I'd told Marcus that morning that I'd be working late, but to expect something special when I got home. The suggestive note in my voice had made his eyebrows rise with interest. Instead of going to the office, I spent the day at the spa, a full treatment of massage, facial, hair, and nails. I bought a new dress, elegant but understated. I wanted to look my best for what was coming. I arrived home at exactly 7:30 p.m., just as dusk was settling over our tree-lined street. The house was lit up, welcoming. I could see Marcus moving in the kitchen through the wide front windows. He was cooking, something he rarely did unless he was trying to impress me. I smiled to myself as I gathered my purse and the large envelope from the passenger seat. Then I walked up the stone path to my house, keys jingling in my hand. "Honey, I'm home," I called as I stepped into the foyer, using the sing-song voice that had once been our private joke. In the kitchen, Marcus called back. "I'm making that pasta you love." I found him at the stove, sleeves rolled up, a dish towel slung over his shoulder. The table was set with our good china and crystal wine glasses. A bottle of expensive Cabernet was breathing on the counter. "This is a surprise," I said, setting my things down on the kitchen island. Marcus turned, and I saw his eyes widen slightly as he took in my appearance. The new dress, the carefully styled hair, the subtle makeup that highlighted rather than transformed. "You look amazing," he said, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the man I'd fallen in love with. The one who had looked at me with genuine desire and affection. "Thank you. So do you." And he did. Marcus had always been handsome, with the kind of classical good looks that aged well. "Something smells wonderful. Pappardelle with wild mushrooms," he said, turning back to the stove. "Should be ready in about 10 minutes. How was your day?" "Productive," I said, pouring myself a glass of wine. "Very productive." We made small talk while he finished cooking, and I allowed myself to enjoy these final moments of our marriage. There was a certain bittersweetness to it. 15 years coming to an end over pasta and expensive wine. Once we were seated and had taken our first bites, I reached for the envelope I'd brought in. "I have something to show you," I said. "Oh." Marcus looked interested. "Is it about the business sale?" "In a way." I opened the envelope and pulled out several photographs, the ones Ria had taken of him and Cassandra. I laid them on the table between us, next to his plate. The color drained from his face as he looked down at the evidence of his betrayal. "What is this?" he asked, but the question was just reflex. He knew exactly what it was. "This," I said calmly, taking a sip of my wine, "is your girlfriend, Cassandra Winters. 28, works in marketing at your firm. You've been seeing her for 7 months. Tuesdays and Thursdays primarily. Though lately, you've been adding some Friday lunch meetings to your schedule." Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Liv, I can explain." "Please don't," I interrupted, keeping my voice even. "Don't insult me with lies about how it didn't mean anything or how you were going to end it. We both know you were planning to leave me. The separate bank account, the apartment searches. You've been planning your exit for months." He sat back in his chair, abandoning any pretense of eating. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to understand that the only reason you're still here is because you found out I might be selling the business." I took another bite of pasta. It was quite good. "You decided to stick around for the payday." A flash of guilt crossed his face, quickly replaced by calculation. "That's not true. Yes, I made a mistake with Cassandra. A terrible mistake. But I've been trying to end it. I realized what was important. Our marriage, our life together." How convenient that this realization coincided with the potential sale of my company. Marcus leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Look, we can work through this." I laughed softly. "That's not going to happen, Marcus." "Why not?" A hint of his true feelings, frustration, entitlement, slipped into his voice. "You just said it yourself, I'm still here. I chose to stay with you." "No," I corrected him. "You chose to stay with my money. There's a difference." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing.
Fine.
I made a mistake. A stupid, horrible mistake. But I'm willing to make it right. Doesn't that count for something? It might have, I admitted. If you'd come clean on your own. If you'd ended things with her because you actually wanted to be with me, not because you saw dollar signs. Marcus's jaw tightened. So what now? You want a divorce? Yes. He nodded slowly, and I could see him shifting to his next strategy. Well, I guess we'll have to figure out how to divide everything. The house, the assets. Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state, you know. And there it was, the threat. The thing he thought would make me reconsider. I smiled and reached for a different folder in my envelope. About that, I have something else to show you. I slid a copy of the deed across the table. His eyes scanned it, confusion gradually giving way to understanding as he saw only my name listed as owner. This house has always been mine, Marcus. It was my grandmother's, then my mother's, then mine. I never added you to the deed. But we've lived here for 15 years. I've paid for repairs, renovations. Actually, I paid for those things, I corrected, from my business accounts, which I've kept separate from our joint finances. You've paid half the utilities and contributed to general household expenses, which makes you essentially a tenant in my home. His face flushed with anger. That's ridiculous. I'm your husband. For now, I agreed. But even as my husband, you have no legal claim to this property. I pulled out another document, our prenuptial agreement. You also have no claim to my business or any proceeds from its sale. The prenup you signed very clearly protects my company and any assets derived from it. Marcus stared at the prenup, then back at me. I could see the realization dawning. He had nothing to gain by staying, and nothing to take if he left. So, what was all this talk about selling the business? He demanded. Just some kind of test. Partly, I admitted. I wanted to see what you would do. Whether you'd go ahead with your plans to leave me for Cassandra, or whether you'd stick around for the money. And, because I stayed, I failed your test. You failed when you started sleeping with someone else, Marcus. You failed when you opened a secret bank account and started looking for a new place to live without telling me. The test was just confirmation. He pushed his plate away, appetite gone. So, what happens now? Now, I said, finishing my wine. You pack a bag and leave. Tonight. Leave? And go where? I don't know. Perhaps Cassandra has room in her Back Bay apartment? After all, you were planning to move in with her eventually, weren't you? His silence was confirmation enough. I've already contacted a divorce attorney. I continued. She'll be in touch with the papers next week. Given the circumstances and the prenup, it should be fairly straightforward. And if I refuse to leave, a hint of defiance entered his voice. I reached for the final document in my envelope. Then I'll be forced to file this restraining order. I have enough evidence of emotional abuse and infidelity to make a compelling case. You'd be removed from the premises anyway, but with a lot more public embarrassment. The restraining order was a bluff. I had no real grounds for one, and we both knew emotional abuse wasn't grounds for such an order in our state. But Marcus wasn't a lawyer, and the official-looking document intimidated him enough. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the calculations behind his eyes again. This time, though, he was realizing he had no leverage, no power in this situation. You've thought of everything, haven't you? He finally said. I've had 7 months to plan while you were busy with Cassandra. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I'll go pack some things. I watched him leave the kitchen, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, I just felt tired. 15 years of marriage, ending like this, not with passionate arguments or tearful pleas, but with cold legal documents and practical arrangements. I poured myself another glass of wine and waited. An hour later, Marcus came downstairs with 2 large suitcases. He'd changed from his casual dinner clothes into a suit, as if dressing for business might give him back some dignity. I was sitting in the living room, curled up on the sofa with my wine glass, watching the fire I'd built in the fireplace. I've taken what I need for now, he said from the doorway. I'll come back for the rest when you're at work. Take whatever is yours, I said without looking at him. but nothing more. He hesitated, and I knew he was debating whether to make one last plea or attempt one final manipulation. In the end, he simply asked, "Did you ever love me, Liv?" The question surprised me enough that I turned to look at him. Of course I did. For many years. When did it stop? I considered the question carefully. I don't know exactly. Maybe around the time you stopped loving me. He flinched slightly. I did love you. Past tense, I noted. At least you're being honest now. Marcus shifted his weight from one foot to the other, suddenly looking much older than his 42 years. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for what I did. I believe you, I said, and part of me did. People were complicated, capable of genuine remorse even after terrible betrayals. But it doesn't change anything. He nodded, accepting this. Goodbye, Liv. Goodbye, Marcus. I listened to his footsteps cross the foyer, heard the front door open and close. Through the window, I watched him load his suitcases into his BMW and drive away from my house, my life. Only then did I allow myself to cry. The tears weren't for him, not really. They were for the 15 years I'd invested in a relationship that had ultimately failed. For the children we'd never had because his career had always been at a critical stage. For the woman I'd been when we married, young, hopeful, believing in forever. I let myself grieve that night, curled up on the sofa with a blanket and the rest of the wine. By morning, my eyes were puffy but my heart felt lighter, as if I'd purged something toxic from my system. Over the next few days, I changed the locks, updated the security system, and began the process of reclaiming my space. I moved Marcus's remaining clothes and personal items into the guest room, ready for him to collect. I rearranged the furniture in the bedroom, bought new sheets, and painted the master bathroom a color he'd always disliked. Small changes, but they helped. A week later, my divorce attorney called to say that Marcus had agreed to an uncontested divorce. He wasn't fighting for anything, not the house, not alimony, not a share of my business. He just wanted out quickly and quietly. He doesn't have a leg to stand on, Caroline told me over the phone. The prenup is solid. The house is clearly yours, and he knows it. Plus, I think he's embarrassed. No man wants to admit his wife outsmarted him so thoroughly. I laughed for what felt like the first time in months. I didn't outsmart him. I just protected myself. Same difference, Caroline said. Anyway, you should have the final papers in about 60 days. Freedom is on the horizon. After I hung up, I wandered from room to room in my house, touching furniture, looking at photographs I'd need to update, making mental notes of changes I wanted to make. The place felt both familiar and new, like a beloved book I was rereading after many years and discovering new aspects to appreciate. That evening, as I sat on my back patio watching the sunset with a glass of wine, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It's Cassandra.
Can we meet?
I stared at the message for a long time. My first instinct was to ignore it or tell her to go to hell. But curiosity won out.
Why?
I texted back. I think we should talk. I owe you that much. I considered this. Did she owe me anything? Did I want to hear whatever she had to say? Tomorrow, 1 p.m. Café Nero downtown, I finally replied. I'll be there. Thank you. The next day, I arrived at the cafe early, choosing a table in the back corner where we wouldn't be easily overheard. I ordered a latte and waited, wondering what this young woman could possibly want to say to me. Cassandra arrived precisely at 1 o'clock. She was just as pretty as in the photos, tall and slim with that enviable long blonde hair. But in person, she looked younger, more vulnerable somehow. She wore minimal makeup, simple jeans and a sweater, as if deliberately trying to look unassuming. Thank you for meeting me, she said as she slid into the chair across from me. I'm not sure why I agreed, I admitted. She ordered a tea when the waitress came by, then faced me directly. I wanted to apologize. What we did was wrong. I studied her, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. I found none. Why are you telling me this? Shouldn't you be riding off into the sunset with Marcus, now that he's free? Cassandra flinched slightly. He didn't tell you? Tell me what? We're not together anymore. She looked down at her tea. After he left your house that night, he came to my apartment. He was different, angry. He said things. What kind of things? I asked, suddenly alert. He said I'd ruined his life. That he could have managed everything if I'd been more discreet. She swallowed hard. He said I wasn't worth what he'd lost. Typical Marcus, always blaming someone else. He stayed that night because he had nowhere else to go, she continued. But in the morning he left. Said he needed a fresh start somewhere else, away from both of us. And yet you're here talking to me instead of moving on with your life, I observed. Cassandra met my eyes directly. Because I need to know if you're going to tell my company about the affair. I could lose my job. In this economy, with my student loans. Now we were getting to the real reason for this meeting. I have no intention of contacting your employer, I said. What would be the point? Relief washed over her face. Thank you. I know I don't deserve your consideration. No, you don't, I agreed. But destroying your career won't undo what happened. We sat in silence for a moment, two women connected by one man's betrayal. Can I ask you something? Cassandra finally said. You can ask. How did you do it? How did you stay so controlled?
When you found out, I mean.
Most women would have thrown things, screamed, called me in the middle of the night. I considered the question. Because losing control wouldn't have served any purpose. Marcus made his choices. I made mine. He underestimated you, she said softly. Men often do, I replied. That's their mistake. After Cassandra left, I sat at the cafe a while longer, thinking about choices and consequences. About how Marcus had assumed I would fall apart without him, had believed that I needed him more than he needed me. About how that fundamental misunderstanding of who I was had been there all along, masked by affection and habit and the comfortable routine of our marriage. In the end, the house was just a symbol. What Marcus had really failed to understand was that I had built my life, my business, my home, my sense of self, on a foundation that existed long before he entered the picture. And it would continue to stand long after he was gone. 6 months after Marcus left, the divorce was finalized with minimal drama. He didn't contest anything, didn't ask for more than what was legally his personal belongings, his own retirement accounts, his car. In exchange, I didn't ask for any spousal support, despite being entitled to it given the length of our marriage and the disparity in our incomes. A clean break was worth more than money. Spring arrived, bringing with it a sense of renewal. I threw myself into a major landscaping project, transforming the backyard of my house into an oasis with a stone patio, raised garden beds, and a small koi pond. Physical labor helped clear my mind, and watching things grow gave me a sense of forward momentum. My business continued to thrive. Contrary to what I'd told Marcus, I had no intention of selling it. Instead, I expanded, hiring 2 new project managers and taking on larger developments. Work had always been my sanctuary, the place where I felt most competent and in control. Friends worried that I was burying myself in work to avoid dealing with the end of my marriage. But the truth was more complicated. I wasn't avoiding grief. I was rediscovering who I was without defining myself as someone's wife. One evening in late May, as I sat on my new patio enjoying the unseasonably warm weather, my sister Jane called. "How's the single life?" she asked after we'd caught up on family news. "Peaceful," I said, watching a hummingbird dart around my newly planted flowers. I'd forgotten what it's like to make decisions without having to consider someone else's preferences or schedule. "Have you heard from him at all?" "Not directly. Caroline told me he's moved to Chicago. Apparently, he took a position with a competitor firm there." "Good riddance," Jane said loyally. "Though I have to say, I'm a little disappointed you didn't take him for everything he was worth in the divorce." I laughed. "That's not what I wanted." "What did you want then?" I thought about it for a moment. To remind him and myself that I never needed him. That this house, my business, my life, they were all mine before him, and they're still mine after him. "Mission accomplished, I'd say," Jane replied. "Though I still think you should have kept his golf clubs. He loved those things more than he ever loved you." We chatted a while longer before hanging up. After the call, I wandered through my house, truly mine now in a way it hadn't felt in years. I'd redecorated several rooms, painted the walls brighter colors, hung art that Marcus had always found too abstract. In the study, I paused in front of the locked drawer where I still kept the evidence of his affair, the photographs, the blonde hair, the records of his separate bank account. I hadn't looked at them since the night he left. I didn't need to. Taking the key from its hiding place, I opened the drawer and gathered everything into a pile. Then I carried it all out to the patio, where the fire pit was already lit for the evening's cooler temperatures. One by one, I fed the documents and photographs into the flames, watching them curl and blacken and finally disintegrate into ash. Not out of forgiveness. I wasn't there yet, might never be, but because I no longer needed physical reminders of his betrayal to validate my decision. As the last photograph burned away, I felt something shift within me. Not the closing of a door, exactly, but the opening of a window, letting in fresh air and new possibilities. The house stood solid behind me, its warm lights glowing in the gathering dusk. My house. My life. Mine alone to shape as I saw fit. Marcus had thought he could replace me easily, had believed that I was the one who needed what we had built together. He'd never understood the fundamental truth of our relationship, that the foundation, both literal and metaphorical, had always been mine. In trying to leave me, he'd only managed to leave himself behind. And I was finally completely free. Almost a year to the day after Marcus left, my doorbell rang on a Sunday afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone, and solicitors rarely made it past the neighborhood's security gate. When I opened the door, Marcus stood on my porch. He looked different, thinner, with more gray in his hair, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He wore casual clothes, not his usual business attire, and he shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. "Hello, Liv," he said, his voice hesitant. I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind scrambling to process his sudden appearance. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "I was in town for a meeting," he said. I don't know what I thought. That I should see you, I guess." I didn't invite him in immediately. Instead, I studied him, trying to understand what he wanted, why he was really here. "It's been a year," I said. "I know." He looked past me into the house. Our house once, now just mine. "You've made changes." I glanced back at the foyer, where I'd replaced the traditional chandelier with a modern pendant light, painted the walls a warm terracotta instead of the neutral beige he'd preferred. "Yes," I said simply. An awkward silence stretched between us. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. "Would you like to come in? I just made some iced tea." He nodded gratefully, and I stepped aside to let him enter. As we walked through to the kitchen, I saw him taking in all the changes, new furniture, different art, the absence of family photos that had once lined the hallway. In the kitchen, I poured 2 glasses of tea and gestured for him to sit at the island. The formal dining room table where we'd had our final confrontation was gone, replaced with a breakfast nook surrounded by windows. "Chicago seems to be agreeing with you," I said, making conversation. "You look well." It wasn't entirely true. He looked tired, older than his years. "It's all right," he said. "Different. The firm is good. The work is challenging." "And your personal life?" I couldn't help asking. Marcus gave a short, humorless laugh. "Non-existent. Turns out starting over at 43 is harder than I expected." I sipped my tea, waiting for him to get to the point of his visit. Marcus had never been one for nostalgia or courtesy calls. "I sold my condo," he finally said. "The one in Chicago. I'm moving back to Boston." This was unexpected. "Oh, another job change." "Same company, different office." I requested the transfer. "I see." I didn't, actually. Why would he want to come back to a city where he had no family, where his ex-wife lived, where people might remember the circumstances of his departure? Marcus seemed to read my thoughts. "I missed it here. Chicago never felt like home." "And will Cassandra be happy about your return?" I couldn't resist asking. He winced. "There's no Cassandra. There hasn't been since the night I left this house." I nodded, remembering my coffee shop meeting with her. "So I heard." You talked to her? He looked surprised.
Once.
Shortly after you left. Marcus stared into his tea. I was an idiot, Liv. About everything. About her, about us, about what I thought I wanted. Here it was the real reason for his visit. Not just passing through, not just courtesy. He wanted something. Why are you here, Marcus? I asked directly. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. I wanted to see you, to apologize properly, face to face, and to tell you that leaving was the biggest mistake of my life. I felt a peculiar calm as I studied him. This was the moment many divorced women dream of, the ex-husband returning, tail between his legs, admitting he was wrong. But I felt no triumph, no vindication. Just a quiet certainty that I had moved beyond this moment long ago. I appreciate the apology, I said carefully. But it's been a year, Marcus. We've both moved on. Have we? He looked around the kitchen, my kitchen, that now bore so little resemblance to the space we'd shared. I haven't. Every day in Chicago, I woke up thinking about what I threw away.
About you.
Not about Cassandra? I couldn't help asking. He flinched. That was never real. She was a distraction. A symptom of something broken in me. Not in us. I raised an eyebrow. That's a convenient reframing. It's the truth, he insisted. I was going through something, call it a midlife crisis if you want, and instead of talking to you, I looked for validation elsewhere. It was selfish and stupid. I sipped my tea, letting the silence stretch between us. Marcus had always been uncomfortable with silence, rushing to fill it with words, plans, distractions. The thing is, he finally continued, coming back to Boston made me realize I still have feelings for you, Liv. Strong feelings. There it was. The real purpose of his visit. Marcus, I said gently, whatever you're thinking, whatever you're hoping for, it's not going to happen. You don't know that, he said, leaning forward. We had 15 years together. That doesn't just disappear. No, it doesn't, I agreed. But it does change. It becomes a chapter that's finished, a part of our past but not our future. He reached across the island to touch my hand. I didn't pull away immediately, but I didn't respond either. I've changed, he said earnestly. This past year taught me what matters. Who matters? I smiled sadly as I withdrew my hand. The problem is, you only realized that after you lost everything. Not everything, he countered. We're both still here. We could start again, differently this time. I could move back. Into my house? I finished for him. Into my life? As if the betrayal never happened. The flash of hope in his eyes dimmed. I know it wouldn't be easy. We'd need time, maybe counseling. But people rebuild marriages after affairs all the time. Some do, I acknowledged. But I don't want to. The words hung in the air between us, simple but definitive. Is there someone else? He asked, his voice tight. I laughed softly.
No.
And that's the point, Marcus. I don't need someone else to make me complete or to justify my choices. I'm happier now than I've been in years. He looked around the kitchen again, as if seeking evidence to contradict me. Finding none, he slumped slightly. So that's it? 15 years just over? They've been over for a year, I reminded him. Today doesn't change that. Marcus nodded slowly, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. I really thought when I got the transfer back to Boston that I'd be waiting. I finished gently. That I'd welcome you back with open arms? Something like that, he admitted. Stupid, I know. Not stupid, I said. Just misguided. You still don't understand what happened between us. Then explain it to me, he said, suddenly intense. Because I've spent a year trying to figure it out. I considered my words carefully. When you had the affair, when you made plans to leave, you didn't just betray our marriage, Marcus. You showed me that you fundamentally misunderstood who I am. You thought I was dependent on you financially, emotionally. You thought I'd fall apart without you. That's not. It is, I interrupted. You were shocked when you realized the house was mine, that my business was protected. You never saw me as an equal partner. I was just convenient, comfortable. He had the decency to look ashamed. I never meant to make you feel that way. I know. And that's almost worse, that you didn't even realize you were doing it. We sat in silence again, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, highlighting all the ways the house had changed in his absence. For what it's worth, Marcus finally said, I am genuinely sorry. Not just for the affair, but for taking you for granted all those years. I believe you, I said, and I did. And I forgive you. He looked up, surprised. You do?
Yes.
Not for your sake, but for mine. Holding on to anger would only keep me tied to the past. Relief washed over his face. Thank you. That means a lot. I stood up, signaling that our conversation was coming to an end. I wish you well in Boston, Marcus. I hope you find what you're looking for. He stood as well, looking somewhat lost. And what about you? What are you looking for? I smiled, truly smiled, for the first time since he'd appeared at my door. I'm not looking anymore. I've found it. I walked him to the door, our footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors that had recently been refinished in a warmer tone. At the threshold, he turned to me one last time. This house, he said, looking back at it with something like wonder. You've made it even more beautiful than it was before. Thank you, I said simply. Take care of yourself, Liv. You too, Marcus. I watched him walk down the stone path to his car, his shoulders straight, but his steps heavy. As he drove away, I felt no regret, no second thoughts. Just a peaceful certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. Back inside, I wandered through the rooms of my home, truly mine now in ways that went beyond legal ownership. Every space reflected my choices, my taste, my vision. The walls I'd painted myself during those first raw months after the divorce. The furniture I'd selected without compromising for someone else's preferences. The garden I'd planted with my own hands, watching it flourish under my care. In the living room, I paused by the large bay window that overlooked the front yard. The evening was settling in, golden light filtering through the new trees I'd planted last fall. They were small still, but growing steadily, their roots reaching deep into the soil with each passing season.
Like me, I thought.
Growing stronger with time. I hadn't lied to Marcus when I said I'd found what I was looking for. What I discovered in the year since our marriage ended wasn't just independence or self-sufficiency. I'd always had those. What I'd found was a profound understanding of my own worth, separate from anyone else's validation or rejection. Marcus had thought he could replace me easily. He'd learned the hard way that I was irreplaceable, not because I was perfect or extraordinary, but because I was wholly, authentically myself. And in that realization, I had found a freedom that no relationship, past or future, could ever take away. The house stood solid around me, its warm lights glowing as darkness fell. My house. My life. Mine to share or not as I chose. And for now, that was enough.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.